Hi everyone, I'm Rhee Alloway from Philadelphia, home of great ideas such as democracy, Rocky the underdog, vegan cheesesteaks, and of course, democracy. Your moderator for today's breakout, post-lunch, you gotta love the post-lunch, from college to CEO, adopting a DEI growth mindset. Sorry about that. Why is this always have to happen? Okay, it's really great to be here. Thank you, Madeline, and of course, Butch and the board of APAICS for your invitation. As much as I've missed gathering for our DC APAHM 2-week extravaganza, I definitely haven't missed the conference lunch options. One day, I hope the choices will be chicken or dumplings, maybe bibimbap. Who's with me here, right? And that's exactly why we're here. We're not to discuss lunch, of course, but meeting the needs of a culturally diverse workforce. Today, we are joined by Cathy Council, Vice President in DEI Center for Awareness and Advocacy of New York Life. Tina Beaumont, unfortunately, cannot be here, Managing Director of Accenture Management Consulting, because she has COVID. But we are joined by Sarah Abiusi, from Managing Director, Accenture of Federal Services. And unfortunately, Janet Van Vissering, Senior Vice President for Development and Production at National Geographic, can't be here because she also got COVID. They're in two separate locations. Not related, completely related. It's not the company policy. This is not what we're talking about, either lunch or COVID. But we are luckily joined by Christine Cadena, Vice President of the DEI market, Walt Disney Company. Woohoo! All right. As you might have read from my bio, I'm CEO of my own coaching and consulting firm, founder of the Best Business Center Women's Biz Co-op, hence college to CEO, online international community of women, LGBTQT, and minority BIPOC, and founding director emeritus of Women in NAAAP, National Association of Asian American Professionals in 10 areas across North America, featured by Forbes Women. Currently, I serve on the Mayor's Commission on Asian Pacific American Affairs and the Steering Committee for Rebuild, a $500 million project to rebuild schools, libraries, and parks. Lately, it's just been parks. I don't know why. No, I'm just joking. With local and our minority films funded by the Philadelphia Soda Tax. My thing is drink more soda. Anyway, Rebuild is one of the largest projects to hire local companies led by people who look like our neighborhoods. Our participation goal is 35%, which anybody from the federal space knows that it's 7 times the federal for women. Under Obama, we reached maybe 3.7, and under this administration, we reached 5.19%. So it is one of the largest projects involving diversity and equity and inclusion. Yes, we can move very slowly, as we know, but the conversation starts with us. So welcome, everyone. Today we'll be talking tough nitty-gritty for diversity and job candidates, people on your teams, challenges in implementing DEI strategies, and the impact of diversity and transparency. We ask that you reserve any questions at the end of our panel. We'll have about 10 minutes for our audience Q&A. And with that, let's get started. All right, Cathy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cathy Council from New York Life, and I have been with the company for 28 years in various careers at the company. Right now, I am the VP and the head of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Center for Employees Engagement and Development, Advocacy, and Awareness.
Do we still do applause? All right. We're like deer in headlights. So what do we do now? Oh, Sarah, would you like to go? Sorry.
Sure. Hi, I'm Sarah Abiusi. I'm a managing director at Accenture Federal Services. And Accenture Federal Services is a wholly owned subsidiary focused on the federal marketplace out of Accenture, which is a global consulting firm, more than, I think, 700,000 people now. So my day job is within federal, and I run our quality and risk program, which essentially means what we want, making sure what we sell to clients, we can deliver and have good client expectation, as well as when we deliver it, I'm the person that helps to make sure we're delivering good work. The reason I'm here, though, for this discussion is my role in our employee resource group space. So for the past 7 years, I've been our U.S. Asian Pacific American Employee Resource Group executive sponsor. We've grown from about 1,000 members to about 5,000 members, increased the number of locations because we're a very federated company. We have about 25 actual local ERGs moving the space. And we'll talk more about our ERGs later on, but that's really why I'm here today.
All right, we're getting the hang of it. Great job, everyone. Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Christine.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Cadena. I represent the Walt Disney Company. I work in diversity and inclusion, overseeing our marketplace practices. And at Disney, that means two things. Internally, looking at how we go to market, how we show up in our content and our product and our experiences. And then externally focused on our stakeholder engagement, looking at how we can learn best practices from our partners on the outside, our advocates, organizations focused on media, inclusion, etc. So great to be here today. Thank you.
All right. 3 times the charm. Great job, everyone. Okay, the first question. What is your organization's strategy to build pipelines for diverse candidates? And Cathy, would you like to start?
Sure.
Oh, good. That's not me.
Okay, so at New York Life, with our talent acquisition, we're looking to really get the breadth and depth of employee engagement. It's not unusual for people to come to New York Life and stay for a very long time. Our slogan is the company you keep. And I would like to say that at 28 years, I'm somewhat considered like a teenager there. There are people that have been there far longer, and it's because it's really the company you keep. So our talent acquisition focuses on making sure that we're bringing diverse candidates as well as accomplished candidates that will really become a part of the New York Life culture. And the way we do that is we have a full-time talent diversity strategist whose job sits between talent acquisition and working with my team on the diversity, equity, and inclusion side as well. We also make sure that our job applications, our postings are inclusive in language, and we have tools that we use to make sure that there's no language that inadvertently may be perceived as exclusionary or biased in any way. Additionally, we have our ERGs. In terms of looking at internally, we work with our ERGs to share job postings, refer candidates, as well as develop professionally through our ERG program so that they continue to move throughout the company, throughout the levels from once they come in to continue to have career growth at New York Life. I think lastly, we also do reporting on this, especially at the different levels. We do speak to leaders, hiring managers to make sure that their candidate pools are also diverse. So they cannot just take the first 2 or 3. That candidate pool needs to be diverse coming in, and that's a standard. And so positions do stay open to make sure that we are really having diverse candidate pools and not just sort of landing on the first quote unquote good resume that we see. So it's really intentional from the point of hiring throughout to becoming an employee, participating in ERGs, as well as up through management to make sure that we're keeping track and being very aware of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We like to say that although we have this center, which I lead for diversity, equity, inclusion, we're more intentional about making sure that is infused through every phase of the process. So it's not just my team, it is within talent acquisition, it's within talent management, it's with the management of the company, it's with individual managers and individual contributors, and everyone has a part to play.
Well, that is impressive, especially in today's age, to include a talent acquisition specialist to have that inclusion language to make sure that they're not excluding certain populations. So, fantastic job. I don't know if, okay.
Why doesn't Christine go next?
Christine,
Sure.
would you like to? Okay, all right.
Well, I'll try to be complimentary to what you said because I think we really go about it in a lot of the same ways in terms of programmatic and looking at all the systems in place. But I like to think of our programs as having sort of three intentional approaches. One, which is investing and really starting with the talent that we have on staff and thinking about what's the environment we've created, what's the culture that we've created, and more than just feeling a sense of belonging, are they visible and is their voice heard and incorporated into our business practice? So I think that's the first place. We have many of the same pipelining programs and look really closely at systemic biases and try to dig deep into how we can change those. But I think advancing those who are inside the house and really thinking about being very surgical about levels and thinking about important positions where we need diverse voices to be integrated into our business practice. The second thing is ownership. Really thinking about what is the role that leaders have in developing the pipeline of talent, sponsoring, who are they sponsoring? What are the next roles they have in mind for their talent? And how are they going to help advance the visibility of their talent into those roles where we need that talent to sit to help us with our business solutions? And then the last one is accountability. A lot like you said, making sure that we're measuring success, that what we've implemented helping move the needle. Have we moved from an okay number to a number we can be proud of, or perhaps even think about over-indexing in particular roles, being very surgical about that, and then pushing that accountability and measuring against it and holding our leaders accountable. So that's sort of an approach way of thinking about it.
No, that's impressive. Of course, Disney is well known for its customer service and talent acquisition. And perhaps all of us someday will be Disney prince and princesses represented too. And Sarah, would you like to talk about the federal space?
Yeah, so I'll talk more broadly about Accenture for a second. So I can't remember what year our now CEO, Julie Sweet, global CEO, essentially when she was North America CEO, decided that she wanted to make all of our all of our numbers externally completely available. And so she basically decided, I'm going to set goals, externally facing goals, because if I don't set goals and make them externally facing, we don't have accountability of those goals. So that meant about gender, equity, as well as underrepresented minorities. And so she set those in the intent of getting somewhere by, I think it was originally 2025, essentially to move those numbers. And we've done a good job essentially incrementally moving those numbers, which is super important. And again, it goes to accountability. It goes to not only being accountable internally to us, but also to our stakeholders, and actually as well as our clients can see that as well. So that's super important. In terms of talent acquisition, I think a lot of the things that we've talked about already hold. One of the things we've also done is sort of opened our aperture on candidates a bit. What we realized is for a very long time, the consulting business essentially was looking at a segment of candidates which said, minimum 4 years bachelor's degrees from college. Mm-hmm. And for us, that was a lot of it was because of whether it be our clients demanded it or federal government guidelines on things were really, really there. So what we've done in the last, I think about 2 years, is actually started an apprentice candidate program out of many locations. We've now gone live with it in Columbus, Boston, and actually now it's going on DC. But the intent is essentially to have an apprentice program for a year that we can bring people along there, maybe 2-year associate degrees, even high school degrees, to bring them into the workforce. Because we know that there's a lot more talent outside of what originally the aperture was, or the box that we grew. And so bringing those folks back in, as well as return to work programs for mothers or basically people who opt out of the workplace for a variety of reasons, to pull those people back in. Because what we want to avoid is essentially the implicit decisions that we're making to essentially exclude talent in the workplace, because we know, we're in the Great Resignation, there's a war for talent everywhere, and we all feel it. I'm sure that you've all seen many flip in your workforces. I can feel that every day too. And so we need to be not only looking at sort of what's the present day situation, but essentially creating the pipeline of what's immediately we potentially going to flip over as well. And I agree on all the other accounts on once you're in the house, it's a different conversation than when it is outside the house. The in the house conversations are implicit, actually looking at individual people and determining what they need to progress. And needing to progress means could be like a mentor. It could be a change in role explicitly that they aren't getting the type of responsibilities they need. And we've actually started doing that very directly, at least in our group in federal, to actually look at individual people and making sure that they have a path to move forward and actually individual actions with every person every year.
Impressive. For all these companies, you can hear accountability, transparency, and of course, all of you leading the charge too. So thank you for your work there. And our next question, how has your company uplifted Asian American employees while anti-Asian hate rises around the country? And who would like to field that?
I'll start.
That was supposed to be Tina, but she's not here.
Okay. So as I'll speak for Tina. So I lead, as I mentioned, the Asian Pacific American Employee Resource Group as the executive sponsor. And when, this all started, I am a huge reader of Twitter. So I was following along every day Dion Lim's coverage in San Francisco and all that stuff, knowing I could see the angst building up. And I was personally feeling it, right? I felt like, and to a certain extent, I am probably the eyes and ears of the company, but it was a question of like, our company is fairly federated. So were other people hearing it? And so one of the first things we did was we got the employee resource group, the leaders of the different locations together saying, I want to hear from you. I'm seeing this. I want to understand what you're hearing. And I think people were uncomfortable initially talking about it because they felt like, I think there's a little bit of a guilt factor to say, how do we feel compared to other groups? And we don't want to necessarily feel like we're saying me, because that's not how we feel. We just didn't necessarily know how to not be invisible. So we had these conversations. And one of the things we decided to do was we reached out to our North American Inclusion Diversity Group and said, hey, we hear that there is people are not only concerned, but also scared, frankly. There was fear factor. And at that point, we weren't going back to work. But the idea was always hovering in people's heads, like, what happens when we go back to work? Yes. Will we face these things on the subway or, driving and stuff? And so we decided to do, we pulled together something we call Building Bridges. And Building Bridges is a Accenture-wide event. It's usually focused, we actually go up to the North America CEO, a guy named Jimmy Etheridge, and he holds it. And the idea is it's a call to action. We've done it since essentially initially, I think, it was probably the original DACA was the first one we did it for, and then it's basically progressed it after George Floyd and a variety of things. And the idea is it's basically a community-based event that comes together and we talk about things. We talk about individual people's lived experiences, whether it be someone in the grocery store having something, someone with a parent that was working in the, in the service industry and how that was affecting them. And we really talked about, and then we talked about things we were going to do, which included giving to AAGC. We talked about self-defense programs and all of these things to get the program together. Now, it didn't just stop there. We continued through to basically do listening sessions and then actions around a variety of things. One of the things that we really realized as we talked through this was that, and I would put myself in this category probably 3 or 4 years ago, I did not know the history of Asian Americans in the United States. So we made it a big thing last year was to educate ourselves on these things because we didn't realize our close connections on civil rights and essentially co-advocacy with various groups. So we basically did a variety of things with not only within the Asian American community, but broader to basically train folks and not just train, but to get awareness and talk about these things in open forums. And I think it did help to basically raise awareness of how different lived experiences across different groups had an implicit impact. And we didn't really realize how those things happened. And we had a first conversation of really trying to address things that were really challenging to talk about, not only just in our personal lives and in our families, but also in the workplace. So those were sort of the first of the many things that we did at Accenture.
Oh, impressive. That's a lot of work to be done in a short period of time. And Cathy.
Yeah, so I will add to that. We did a lot of the similar things, and our program is called Coming Together series, where we come together to actually have the tough conversations. But as a company, we've donated to organizations, particularly Asian American Legal Defense Funds, to really focus on this, but internally, in terms of bringing employees together, we've had some of our Asian American senior leaders actually write a letter to everyone. And it wasn't a letter of like, New York Life, we support you. It was actually his personal lived experience. And that really opened the door for a lot of conversation, because when your leadership is able to share and show that vulnerability and the humanity, it made it easier for us to have more of the conversations through all levels of the company. We also, with our Asian Pacific Circle ERG Employee Resource Group, we have various activities, but one of the things I want to we're based in New York, and the subway crimes and things were ticking up just as we were getting ready to start to return into the office after not having been into the office for a couple of years. And so we led in conversations about what can we do to really help quell some of that fear. And that was more of grassroots, as everyone started to share their concerns about going back into the office, being safe in the city, being safe in the building. And so we developed walking groups and commuting groups and ways for people to sort of connect together and be safe as we return to work. And I think that's like hallmark of New York Life as a company. Just we're always like a family, making sure that everyone is safe. But that was something that we had to recognize while you're making all the grand plans of returning to work, sort of like where are people sitting and all the people that are coming back or new people that don't even have desks. Also, but what about your commute? Like, how do you feel safe from the moment you leave your house, especially since we went full-time remote for 2 years? It's like even that anxiety of just returning to work and then adding the complexity of all the things that were going on in New York City at the time. And so I think what we saw was more complete, just not only from our foundation and the donations we made, but from our leadership really opening up and sharing personally to have that discussion. And then from our grassroots, from our ERG, to really talk about these are the concerns that we have, how can we address that? And then really coming up with solutions that help and make it possible to really address this in a way to let not only the APC community know that we care, but it's like, how can we help?
Right. Huge.
Really similar and very inspiring. We very much lean on our burgs. We have 92 burgs across the company, and our API burgs are very active, but not always as loud as some of our other burgs. And what we've worked on over the last few years is, number one, making sure that they're heard, but also amplifying their voice through what we call our advisory council, bringing all the burgs together of a dimension and across dimensions together regularly. And so to their credit, the advisory board was able to activate really quickly and initiated their own what we call brave space conversations. So very similar to what you guys host. But for us, they're safe spaces for employees to talk about their lived experience, but for allies to engage and learn along the way as well. And I think with all of the racial equity issues that have been happening, I think there was a need to understand the specific lived experience of our API folks in the company. And they did come up with a whole list of ideas of how they wanted to activate against that. Not only how the company should be using its resources to support organizations on the outside, but a major global forum to talk about their lived experience, but also to talk about the data and advance knowledge around the history of our communities, plural, and their role in the civil rights movement and their role and what they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And I think that was really impactful. We had several speakers come in to kick off the experience, but then we had employees talk about their own lived experience and it helped open a conversation, not just at a company-wide level, but in individual staff meetings, conversations with leaders and their employees, and employees and allies across the spectrum. So I think that was really, really powerful. But one of the things that we did that I thought was the group advocated for that I was really proud of is producing a video. So our employees have access to our news division. And so a couple of our editors took on an editing project where they cut together the voices of many, many employees across the company. It's posted on YouTube. And it's different for us because generally we don't speak as much on the outside. And that's a muscle we're developing inside the company. And so employees put together their own voices, their own lived experience, their own cultural heritage and their perspective. And it was a incredibly important moment for us at the company because it allowed employees to collectively speak on their experience, but start a conversation, but not always have to revisit their trauma. And so the idea of having this vehicle to start a conversation, to create awareness, but also activate those voices those who didn't feel as active or as empowered to use their voice. In addition to it, you mentioned Dion Lim. We're really proud of our local and national producers, on-air talent and editors who put together several stories that talked about stopping API hate, reporting on the data, expanding information, and most recently, our ABC reporter, I can't remember her name. Juju Chang, yeah. And her Nightline feature. So we're just really excited about how our talent, both public-facing and internal, have used their voices to activate both their fellow employees, but also to have a larger impact in the world.
Well, I want to add one more thing. So one of the other observations is, so I've been in this role for 7 years, and you know the people you know because of the people that speak out. What was interesting about what happened was suddenly there was suddenly this grassroots thing happened and many more people came out of the woodwork. Mm-hmm. So we have a steering committee, but suddenly there were 40 or 50 people that were saying, what are we doing about this? Senior people that were coming out of the woodwork to say, I want to see something. We actually did a letter for North America CEO talking about observations and things that we wanted to work through with. But that would never have happened. Mm-hmm. At all. The voices would never have come out, whether it be bamboo ceiling, the ideas of, the tallest nail gets the hit versus the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Mm-hmm. I just think that would have never. So to a certain extent, it's all awful. I'm not trying to say it is, but the group and the coalescing of this sort of feeling of belonging changed in the company. And so I now know I have 60 or 70 people that are like my level that are interested in the same focuses to make sure the company is a better place and will do things when asked and actually are doing things on their own to come forward, which is a very different pivot than I'd seen in the past. So,
yeah, totally agree. Equally, our employees wrote a letter, and I think that's something we hadn't seen in our community. We'd seen it in other communities, and to the point, it was an opportunity, a door opened, and one that should never close.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure everybody's getting the message to share your lived-in experience and come out of the Asian closet. Let them know that we are here and that we are loud and we are proud and we are here to stay. Okay, all right. How did your organization overcome challenges when implementing DEI strategies? Ooh, there's a good one for all of you.
I'll start. How long do you have to talk about this? I guess our mantra is really progress, not perfection. And I think in the long arc, you have to take every moment, be it painful and traumatic, and really dig in and do the work. And I think the events of last year, but moreover, the many events that we're experiencing, we are experiencing a reckoning. And for us at the company, transitioning our former programs to really thinking about ownership and how we conduct business, and rooting our DEI practice and evolving it from running burgs, running programs that advance equity, running a practice of DEI to making it a practice of business is our ultimate goal. And in that transition requires the company to transition with you. Sometimes very painful points, sometimes very public points that, we would love not to have press coverage on, but ultimately, if we stay focused on our values and where we're headed in terms of transforming our company, transforming our workforce, and creating the kind of vibrant culture and workforce that we know gets us to excellence, it changes our business practice and, more importantly, our impact on the world. And what we've seen over time is that, I guess the most painful things are really when we get it wrong. But when I look back at those moments, I've seen the greatest moments of growth. And it's really when leaders, you identify who really is a leader and who can lean in and who runs for the hills. And so what it's helped us identify are folks who are willing to raise their hand and engage. And that's ultimately what you need, is you need it to be embedded in a leadership practice, in how you conduct business. And let's just say that if that is your aspiration, you have to be willing to examine every aspect of your business, the most tried and true practices in terms of how you show up, who gets chosen for a role on screen, who makes the most money. All of those practices have to be considered if you're really willing to transform your company and be prepared for the kind of company everyone needs to be to consider themselves excellent. So that was a lot of stuff, but I think
I think this panel's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, you're trying to fit a big a lot into one question. Yeah, for sure. I'm sure you all have more to add to that.
Yeah, overcoming these challenges.
Yeah, I would add, New York Life has a long history of including diversity and inclusion, which is where we started. And then we added and expanded to include diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really having a foundation of belonging at the core of it, right? Because, like I said, everyone's quite tenured at New York Life. So there's definitely that sense of belonging underpinning it all and bringing that forward. And I would say and agree with much of what you said, is like how that gets infused into the business. So for the longest time, it was more about pockets where, in terms of the challenges, where we were going out more to the business and saying, look, we need to do this, we have to do this. We were explaining the benefits. We're really sort of infusing ourselves or pushing ourselves maybe a little bit onto the business to take this into account. And I think those were the challenges that we had to just stay the course and really, be persistent about the importance of this. And our business evolved. And now we're the reverse. It's like, we want to do this, much like what you said. We have so many executives coming out of the woodwork to say, okay, I'm ready for my diversity report. What are the programs that we can do as a team? How can I get people signed up on your list? So it's now our newest challenge, because we're so far in our evolution, is keeping up and to make sure that we're providing robust access, programming, development, and keeping up with the momentum that we've built. So we're very happy. It's like a good challenge to have now, when at first it was more challenging to sort of introduce this at a business level, especially at a company where we're very deliberate about the decisions we make. And so things take time to sort of get through the various different layers. And so now we're all the way through, and it's like coming fast, much faster. So that's our most current challenge right now, but it's a challenge that I welcome.
I mean, I think you guys have said it all. I mean, we're talking about this idea of the corporation for social good is sort of how I think about it. And I think that's a big change of like what we've seen in the past, right? It's the, whether it be the climate, whether it be, equity and inclusion, all of these things are coming in. And, how do you take a stand and be a valuable business entity, but also stand your ground from your ethics and your morals and whatever you think of your core values. And all of those things go together. And I think, this next generation people that are coming into our companies, they feel that the ethics are just as important as the business we run, and they have to be going hand in hand. And so I think keeping that in not only just the minds of as we have like diversity professionals in there, but everybody has to sort of operate from that same sheet of music. And if we are, then we're doing the right things. And we want, I even asked one time, we were talking about something about like some deal we were going to pursue. And I said, are we going to do this? And the CEO said to me, he's like, if this ever goes against our ideals and our core values, we will just walk away. This is not something we will ever stand behind. And I think that it's not just about like me hearing it as an executive, but everybody in the room hearing it and all of our employees knowing that we have a point of view and we're doing what we bid and we go after the work that we think is in line with our values is an incredibly important thing for not only for us to sort of implicitly know, but actually to hear. Because if you hear it, then it's going to be something that you actually can track for.
Well, it sounds like all three of these corporations are starting to live their values, where I think of the Sheryl Sandberg quote, not about just being a woman's leadership, and we can even parlay that to the DEI conversation as just plain leadership, and getting to that point and overcoming those challenges. Like, hey, we're all people, we're leading. Doesn't matter what our gender and or who we're representing in terms of culture, affiliation, religion, etc. All the different categories that I could go over at this point in time, which is really exciting because we're standing at the forefront. All right. So what are some of the positive changes have you seen as a result of your company prioritizing diversity in the workplace? And I believe, Cathy, you wanted to start.
Yeah, I'll be happy to start. And sort of pick up where I just left off about how we have so much more engagement coming from the business. Certainly is one of the positive things that we see of our efforts over the years. But additionally, we have aligned cultural markets where, to your point about making it part of the business, that's actually part of our business, that our workforce reflects the communities that we serve. And so we actually are seeing that in the business that we have. So right now, our cultural markets account for nearly 50% of the business that we do in this space. So it's very much what we are experiencing as employees inside is reflecting in how we show up in the community, and therefore is good business for us as well. But when we do our employee engagement survey, we're also seeing that over 85% of employees would recommend working at our company to people they know, or that over 80% are feels like this is a place where they can be themselves, no matter their race, gender identity, any of the above. And so the more we see that employees actually believe we are living the values, that we're not just posting them on our website, but we're actually living those values. And this is a place where we are putting action behind our words, and we are really trying to make this company as inclusive as we try to make ourselves as successful as possible. It's not just the business. It is just who we are now.
Sure.
And so I feel like the increased engagement, particularly in my role, just having individuals, it's not even so much that I have executives approach and talk about what they can do for their teams and their departments. It's the individual who says, thank you, that was such a great coaching session. I'm glad I have that available to me. It's individuals saying, oh, I saw this and I just thought this would be something good for me to bring to the DE&I Center. And I think that, they believe that we can help. They believe that we are there for them as well. And I feel like that's one of the other unsung benefits. Like, I don't have a number on that, but in terms of being able to recognize that I'm really reaching all the different levels because everyone feels comfortable.
Nice.
Approaching is really where I can see that, it's one of the best ways that we can really judge where we're making an impact in this space.
Great.
Should I go?
Christine?
Sure. I would say that the biggest impact that I've seen in our inclusion journey is the kind of cultural connection we have with our customers. And, at the very heart of what we do, we tell stories. We're a creative engine that enables those stories and experiences and products and in theater and stream to your home. But what we see is a shift in representation on screen. And it's not just representation, visible representation, one of each color, one of each race, one of each gender, but actually that true deep connection that only happens through authenticity, through true voice, through true lived experience. And when we know that our employees show up where they can tell their real stories, where they can tell their own personal stories, that's when we see the spark happen on screen. And it's always a collective experience because so many people are involved in the creative process and getting something on screen or brought to your home. But we see that connection changing with the kind of stories that we tell. And that for me is the most gratifying when, and I came to this work from a brand strategy role. And because I didn't see my story on screen, because I didn't see my kids connect with the characters that would become the stories that we told in our family. The first movie you saw when my daughter saw was The Little Mermaid. And she didn't look like Ariel, and that wasn't good enough. And so those are the kinds of changes that I think really make a difference. And, through that, because we're enabling that voice inside the company, we see our employee engagement at all-time highs, their voices being heard and pushing us to be the company that we need to be. And so that's an exciting change. And the kind of filmmakers that are bringing us projects are changing too. And we're talking about changing an industry, and a very small group of people who get to tell stories, and really changing and expanding who gets to tell them is a goal for us. And we're starting to see that tide shift.
That's amazing.
So I think I'd look at this a little bit differently. I think as Accenture, we do so many more client service specific, like very much specific projects for different clients. But here's a few things I'd say. I think there's been a shift in terms of like the ERGs and the DEI pushing out versus people asking and wanting to know more. Whether it be like I did, our whole federal group was looking at some numbers and we were talking about attrition specifically on APA. And they're like, what can we do to do something about this? And they came to me. It wasn't me pushing. So we did sessions for everybody. And we did some bamboo ceiling thing I'd done a few times. And I was shocked afterwards to see the number of people that reached out to me saying, I never knew that. And here's why it was important to me. And it was people like the CFO reached out. And I was like, oh, you were on that call? Okay, I didn't know that. But it was really, really great. Very specifically also is our relationship with APAICS came out of all of this. The person who runs the Southeast is a guy named Marty Rogers. And Marty's been involved with inclusion and diversity for years. He actually was on the Hill years and years ago and was part of basically getting the MLK Day legislation passed years ago. But he came and he said, I got an email from our government relations folks saying, Marty wants to get involved with similar what we do for the HA and the AA communities. We want to be involved on the government side, and we had not been. And I was like, okay. Sure, yeah, that's great. But that would not have happened. And it wasn't, again, us pushing it. Sure. It was someone else looking at sort of the portfolio of what we did, not only internally for our people, but also externally in the marketplace, whether it be from a lobbying and government relationships perspective, as well as other groups like the Asian American Foundation and other things. So I think that was also a pivot on how not are we just looking at this from what is the internal inside the house perspective, but also how do we look at things from a market perspective, a leadership perspective externally, as well as just a legislation and social good perspective. So that was definitely a pivot, I think, for us as well.
That's huge. The theme that I'm hearing definitely is that it all starts with you. Well, that the positive changes start with you and having those conversations, because they're talking about how it's been driven from the inside and not from a top down. So yeah, start talking. All right. What role does transparency play in your efforts to increase employee diversity? And Janet was going to field this one, so Christine.
Okay, I'll talk fast. I am a huge advocate around transparency, and Mike, who's my partner in GR here in DC, can attest to this. Last year, we launched a new site called Reimagine Tomorrow, where we talk about our intention at the company, and it's not only for public consumption, but it's really for our employees as well, because a company at our size, it's hard to get to every part of the company and share our data. But it is also that public commitment that puts teeth into change, right? So we are committed to publishing numbers around our people, our culture, our content, like what do we put up on screen, and then how we invest in communities. And while it is as important for us to talk about what we're doing that's good, it's just as important for us to talk about where we're falling down and how we need to improve and how we want to be committed to that change. And some really interesting things have ensued. Through that transparency, during the pandemic, we took on a project called Stories Matter, where we looked at the entire library of our content and addressed issues that were problematic and publicly labeled some of our content that historically was marginalizing. And so owning that history helps you to move forward, helps you to, and for us, it was an opportunity to talk about that harmful storytelling, but it also allowed us to engage with leaders and storytellers, both inside and outside, to talk about what we were going to do differently. And so that opportunity of transparency, while difficult, and a lot of people, including our PR folks, said, why do we need to do that? It was a great opportunity to be able to reconcile that history, but move forward and change that history. So really, really a big advocate of that. Second example is we started a program last year called our inclusion standards. And so for our industry, we established some standards for how we want to make movies. So not just, actually, it started with television, so I'll start with television. Who is behind the camera, who's in front of the camera, who gets to write, who gets to produce, and who gets to work on a production, like literally, union staff for a production. And keeping track and using a standard to evaluate your own performance makes change. And in fact, we have seen that. I'll just say that, for example, we just finished recapping our 21 performance, and 49% of our leads were people of color. 40% of our directors were people of color. And writers, 34%. If you know anything about industry numbers, you guys probably don't follow that boring stuff. But for people who do keep track, those are significant changes. And that comes from keeping track, holding people accountable. And guess what? There were no big sticks or punishments for folks. It was folks knowing what needed to get done and being intentional about it, and also being accountable to it. So
Amazing. Maybe one day I'll get to hold baby Yoda then. We only have a couple of minutes, so I don't know if the two of you want to address this, or do you want to skip for the audience to have questions? Yeah. So we've heard so much about diversity, overcoming challenges, impacts, and transparency today from our panelists, from Sarah, from Cathy and Christine. I'm sorry, I'm blanked out on your name for a second. Too many C's. And one of the important things is that we know the changing dynamics here in the United States. There are over 10 states that are majority-minority. That means that the children here are minorities. So we're at a crux right now with our nation and what it means for the DEI conversation, where pretty soon, unfortunately, I don't know your name, where or the representations of him and his race will become it'll be the flip side. So when we're talking about this, we're not just setting up standards going forward, we're setting up standards for the next generation of how we're going to be held accountable. What does transparency look like? What does inclusion for everybody look like, no matter what your race and background is? So we'd love to hear these questions from you. As far as I know, none of your supervisors are up here. So if you have I know, exactly, that kind of, anyway. And so if you have a burning desire, something that you would love to get off of your chest and start expressing yourself for free, and identify yourself too, your name, where you're from.
My name is Walt. I am a Navy veteran, and
Thank you for your service.
having previously served in the Biden administration, I focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and the accessibility piece of the executive order that came out. And one of the things that we recognize is that the federal government is trying their best to capture the data from that standpoint, focusing on, obviously inclusion being one of the primary aspects of it, but also promotion, career development, and retention. So I'd love to hear more from your individual companies in terms of how you're achieving that. And my apologies, I did come in a little bit late, so if some of that was already addressed, again, my apologies.
If you can do it in 1 minute or less.
Kind of ditto what we just said the last hour.
I think everybody collects data because we have to, and we provide EEO data, right? Because it's Department of Labor.
Right.
We take it very seriously. We look at it constantly on attrition and every different slice, right? Whether it be gender, whether it be accessibility, whether it be all those things, as well as on the equity side to make sure that we're also not overlooking pay, right? Because pay is a significant portion, not just numbers. So we take it very seriously. It's being constantly run in the background, as well as trying to make sure that the implicit decisions that we're making on promotion and performance are also taking those things into account. So as a person that sort of stands in the middle on that line of sort of the people serving clients as well as on the other side, I know we're doing it constantly. I think that what's more challenging is to explain to everybody that this is being done, because not everyone sees it.
Sure.
So they don't actually, we can say there's lip service to it, but there's essentially the question of how does the lip service and all the actions that are happening behind actually translate into things people see? And you have to be a little bit sensitive because there's privacy data, right? A lot of this whole thing is all about privacy. We need to be sensitive to that as well. But I know we do it because I am part of it. So.
Thank you, Sarah.
I will add that in addition to that, but we also participate in external surveys so that not only does that help us sort of see where we land, right? Because they're getting data from all different organizations, right? But then there's the part about being able to learn from other organizations to see where we can improve or expand. And so my favorite part of doing that process is actually the debrief on the other side of, okay, this is where we landed, and then breaking that down to see where, we may need more work in this particular area or another. And so we participate in a lot of external surveys that not only is answered through the DE&I Center, but through our business areas to say, what are they doing from a business perspective? Also for these different groups as well. So that's another way, in addition to, everything that we said earlier.
For the past hour.
One quick addition is, to your point, taking a very holistic and intersectional approach is really wise, but also having the discipline to be very surgical about the things you attack, because it's a giant ocean of tactics, and you just have to really hone in on the things that are going to be meaningful for your organization and drive the long game, not necessarily short. So.
Yeah. Whew. The long game, that's what it's all about. Does anybody else have a question?
I do.
Okay, and your name?
I'm Cathy from CACA, which is Chinese American Citizens Alliance, but my day job is with a large aerospace company up in Seattle.
Never
My
heard of it.
question is,
this is about the pipeline and interviewing. A lot of the rank and file management, they get training for cultural sensitivity, but I wonder, is DEI involved in that kind of training in your organizations, and how successful have you seen that?
Go ahead, Cathy. Cathy.
So, yes, our management does get training, and we also have training around interviewing, specifically to make sure that that's inclusive and questions are not phrased in such a way that is immediately off-putting or already leaning towards a particular bias. But in addition to that, when we're hiring and we're looking at the slate of interviewers, we diversify the interviewers as well. So not only by level, but by gender, by race, by ability as well. So that's more how we sort of manage that, in addition to everything that you mentioned as well, bias training, inclusive management, as well as behavioral based interviewing, and really looking at the types of questions that are being asked in order to embed diversity, equity, and inclusion in the hiring process.
Excellent.
I'll just add one little thing to that, because the systems elements that you talked about, Cathy, are like so essential, but we also find that it has to be personal. Your leaders have to have that personal connection to the work and the personal connection to growth, and really understanding how to think outside of their own lens. And everybody arrives at that ownership in a different way, timetable, and road.
Great. I see the AV person here looking at us, ready to turn off the camera. So let's sum it up, and we can keep it open for questions and move off to the side. All of you, we are the future. We are the present, right? We are the gift. So do not be afraid to speak up for yourselves, to feel welcomed. You are welcomed. You are already hired. You're in. You're already a part of the family, the organization. And I hope that you find your tribe through ERGs. And of course, one day I hope that one of you will be the next CEO influencing all these DEI policies. And with that, I'd like to wrap up. Thank you so much for being here today.